Hey everyone, welcome back to another video. In this one, I'm clearly going to be taking a look at Blade, and in the 7 years that the character has been out, I don't believe that he has ever once been meta or even good at any content, and although he is currently not meta in anything, I think he is actually really good in at least PvE modes, which is refreshing since it's basically like being able to play a new character. Because I tested the character out in all of the content, I know how good he is in PvE, but I also got to see how good he is in PvP as well, and it's sad to say that in Timeline he doesn't really have the tools in his kit to excel in that, but in Alliance Conquest he actually did surprisingly well and can hold his own. The first thing I took a look at was to see just how good the uniform is by itself, without considering the T3 stat bump and the T3 skill itself. The build that I'm currently running is a regular CTP of Destruction, no artifact, and 6-star Uru on all his gears. With just that, I was able to clear stage 99 of Thanos in 3 minutes and 20 seconds roughly. After gaining the T3 stat bump and accessing the T3 skill, I was able to improve the clear time by about a minute. Clearing stage 99 of Thanos in about 2 minutes is a good sign that the character has good damage, and more so when I took him into a stage 99 of Proxima, where he completed it in nearly 30 seconds to 40 seconds, depending on how well I played that fight. One of the main reasons why he completes this stage so quickly is because he has all defense down on his 5th skill now, and it applies to the max cap of 50% very quickly, since it's 10% all defense down with every hit. So if you're working on your account and need more characters that can clear World Boss Ultimate, Blade is a pretty decent option, considering that all defense down stacks so quickly. But once you T3 the character, you also have a really solid Leadership Edition for World Boss Legend, since he gives you up to 60% additional damage to Weapon Master tagged characters. After I saw how well Blade was doing in World Boss Ultimate, I decided to upgrade his build by giving him a reforged CTP of Destruction, with that strike effect going up to that 110% additional damage to bosses. As you can see from my CTP option, the character can obviously work with a single skill damage proc, like a Destruction. You could also use a CTP of Energy, since he is fairly proc friendly. However, the character doesn't have many skills that can be cancelled and layered on top of one another, so if you want to fully maximize his damage, I'm pretty sure that a CTP of Rage might allow you to do that, since the 4th and 5th skill actually do a good amount of damage by themselves. He sadly doesn't have guaranteed crit built into his kit, but if you do have Taskmaster with his latest uniform, he does provide guaranteed crit to Weapon Master tagged characters, which Blade is obviously one of them. So basically, if you plan on using the character for things like World Boss Legend or PvP to some extent, a CTP of Destruction is great for that, since he also doesn't have native penetration in his kit. But if you want to use the character for things like auto modes, dispatch, maybe dimension rifts, or in Giant Boss Raid, then a CTP of Rage would likely be better for that. As a quick note, when I'm talking about the Destruction and Energy comparison versus Rage, I'm talking about the reforged ones, since the regular ones probably don't hold up that well versus Rage. As you saw from that last clip, I was able to complete Knull in almost a minute flat. I finished it in about 70 seconds, so I obviously had to test on a higher stage. Unfortunately, there wasn't really any good support options for the stage restrictions between 20 and 24 for Knull, so I ended up just using Blade's lead. I was actually quite surprised to find out that I could clear this stage with 2 minutes to spare or in 3 minutes flat with no additional supports. And keep in mind that I still don't have any artifacts on the character, and if I wanted to, I could push the build even higher with Odin's Blessing. If you're wondering what kind of rotation I was using during my testing, the one that I found out worked the best was to do a 4 cancel, 3 delay cancel very slightly till he kind of jumps a little bit up in the air and throws stakes or shrapnel down on the ground, and then you go into the 5th skill, which is the one you want to proc on and stay in. After that, you do your 1 cancel 2 to fill up your ultimate meter faster, and while you're waiting for the other skills to come back off cooldown. At this point, you're going to end up filling your ultimate by the end of the 2nd rotation, so you're going to change it a little bit and do the 5 cancel 4 cancel 3 delay cancel, and then the 6th or ultimate skill, which is again the one you're going to proc on. The timing for the delay cancel on the 3 is a little bit tricky, so you can avoid it if you want to and just simply cancel it right away, but if you want to squeeze out those extra hits at the risk of potentially maybe missing your proc but doing a lot more damage, then you can delay cancel the 3 instead. In this clip you can see the difference between canceling and delay canceling the 3rd skill. The first time I do the rotation, I instantly cancel it and end up with 39 hits, whereas in the second one I delay cancel the 3rd hit, so you can see the stakes on the ground, and end up with 11 more hits, which is actually a lot of damage over the course of a long period of time. Also keep in mind that this is obviously the rotation for a single skill damage proc like a destruction or energy. I'm not really sure what the rotation would be for CTP of Rage, but if I would have to guess, it would probably be a 3 going into the 4 and then going into the 5th skill. Or if that procs too early, then you might have to do a 3 cancel 4 and then go into the 5th skill. I was actually so impressed with how well Blade did in the Knull fights that I also decided to take him in the Mephisto and Ultron fights, just to see how well he could cope with the first stage of Mephisto's fight, and to see how much damage his ultimate would do, i.e. how many bars it would do just by proccing off the 6th skill. Funny enough, even though Blade has a type disadvantage versus Mephisto, I was still able to clear it in a minute, which is crazy considering some characters that I have that even do have a type advantage can't clear it in that short amount of time. During my time testing Blade in the Knull fights, I noticed that his ultimate actually hit very hard and is probably one of the top damage ultimates in the game, very similar to Hela's ultimate. But unlike Hela, his regular rotation actually does a lot of damage as well. As you can see in this video, one regular rotation without the ultimate does about 5 bars of damage on a Mephisto stage 29. And then with the ultimate, he was doing anywhere between 12 to 15 bars of damage depending on the card and ISO 8 procs that activate, but in this clip you're only seeing 10 bars since I was cut off by the phase change. Then versus a stage 19 of World Boss Legend Ultron, he was doing about 2.5 bars of health for me with his regular rotation, and then with his ultimate, he was doing anywhere from 4 to 5 bars of health. I also took him into a solo run of Giant Boss Ray Dormammu and found out that the ultimate did a whopping 32 bars of damage. You can see he started with 64 bars and then I finished with 32. With about 2 minutes to spare, I was then able to complete the fight entirely using just Blade. I tested the character in the Combat Hero Restriction Day for Alliance Battle Extreme as well, but that kind of went disastrously since, first of all, he doesn't have paralysis, so I had to kind of swap out, but also because he didn't seem to do much damage in that mode. My guess for the reasoning behind that is that he has a lot of skills that do a lot of damage, but not many of them can be layered on top of one another to add a lot of hits. So most often he's just using one skill at a time, but most characters that are meta in this mode are usually ones that can stack a lot of skills on top of one another and have a lot of hits, or can continuously do damage with a lot of hits. Keep in mind that I was using a CTP of Destruction, so a CTP of Rage would probably perform much better than what you see here, but from what I've heard online, he doesn't really seem to be made for that mode. Timeline is another mode that he's not built to handle since he doesn't have some of the key requirements like iframe ignore, reflect, 2 lives, or immortality, but he does seem to hold his own with the current kit that he has. I obviously wouldn't recommend using the character for timeline, but this testing is to show you just what he can do in PvP so that you can get a better idea of how he might handle in Alliance Conquest, which I do also have a little bit of testing on after this timeline showcase. His AI is surprisingly good because it immediately opens up with the 5th skill, which has very high skill priority and is a full iframe, and then usually goes into the 3rd and 4th skill, which are also iframes and all also do a high amount of damage. As you can see, with a CTP of Destruction, he's capable of one-shotting most meta characters, but after that, if they revive or have any other kind of survivability, he won't be able to survive against them. He does have really high base HP and healing from the damage he does, so If you wanted to try a defensive build, you could opt for something like a CTP of Regen, or if you don't have those, you could also try a CTP of Authority, since he also does have mitigation in his kit from his uniform. But I personally opted against that since I felt that it probably won't help him too much, and because I wanted to get dual use out of him with that hybrid CTP of Destruction option. Another thing that's nice is that if any of his skills gets cancelled, his 5, 4, or 3, he gains plenty of buffs, including damage buffs, super armor, immunity, and even damage accumulation. This means that any following skills will likely be a one-shot from the damage proc activating, the buffs, and the penetration. The third skill is also nice because it allows the character to attack while repositioning and avoiding the opponent's attack. Even though Blade doesn't excel in PvP content like Timeline, he actually does really well in content like Alliance Conquest, since he often opens up with that fifth skill, with that damage proc and the penetration, not to mention the long animation. He's likely to take out the opponent before he comes out of the fifth skill, and they can do the same to him. In addition to the fifth skill, which also has really high skill priority and is one of the reasons why it's so good, the character has a great leadership, which can be paired with some really good characters like Hawkeye. One of the things you can do if you know that the character won't be able to survive really well is to pair them with a character that has a defensive build. So in this case, I knew that Blade would very likely be able to wipe out the Eternals, but not survive Cersei's Awakening skill, which is why I paired the character with my defensive build Hawkeye. Another benefit of Blade in Alliance Conquest is that you don't have to use his leadership or a debuff lead even, because his tier 1 passive cleanses him of any debuffs when he uses a bleed effect. That means that you can use a leadership like Drax's to boost up his HP and survival a little bit higher when facing off against those speed teams. As I said in the beginning of the video, Blade isn't really meta for any content, but he is really fun and really strong finally. So if you are a fan of the character, I would recommend picking up this uniform. Even though the character is not meta for anything, he is a very solid addition to your roster for content like Giant Boss Raid, World Boss Legend, and a solid hybrid option for Alliance Conquest. In addition to that, one of my alliance mates by the tag of Thor1H also did some testing with the character in Dimension Rifts, and he found out that the character was only about 1 clear behind his Loki team and was actually faster than his Thena team by 1 clear. This is likely because the character can run with his own leadership and has that very quickly stacking all defense down and good AoE. The 5th skill lasts for pretty long, so that all defense down can be applied to numerous enemies. Just note that he did that with a CTP of Rage. You're likely not going to get as good a performance if you're using a single skill damage proc. And although you probably won't use the character for Dimension Rifts, keep in mind that one of the challenges for 12.5 of this patch is to clear it with 3 combat types, and in the future, Blade might be essential for you to be able to do that if you combine him with a T4 combat type. So just something to think about if you wanted additional reasons to pick up the uniform. The next video that I'm going to be working on is the Robbie Reyes one, though that might be potentially a day or so late since I have some other stuff to deal with first. After that, I'm thinking about doing a Dormammu Giant Boss Raid kind of guide, so if you do want to see that, please let me know in the comments. If you don't, then I can kind of figure out some other video to make. But if you did like this video and you found it interesting, please consider liking, sharing, and subscribing. As always, it does help me out. I always appreciate the time that people take to watch these videos, so thank you for that. But the video's now over.